You're not a soldier. You're not a prepper with a bunker full of canned beans and a 15-year plan. You're just a person on a normal Tuesday when the sky over the city 40 miles east turns white for 2 full seconds. 10 minutes. That's what you got before the fallout reaches your street. By the end of today, you'll have lived through nuclear war. By the end of this week, you'll have lived through 9 more ways to die that nobody ever trained you for. A blackout with no warning, a cloud that isn't fog, a line you're on the wrong side of, a clock made of water instead of time, a highway that becomes a trap, a curfew that locks a city in half, a sickness with no dramatic moment at all, a blockade that tests patience instead of speed, and 40 strangers sharing air that's running out. This is what actually happens to your body, your home, and your city when the world goes to war, and exactly what keeps you alive when it does. Let's start at the beginning. The flash. The flash comes first, before the sound, before anything. You're at the kitchen window, coffee halfway to your mouth, when the horizon goes white, brighter than daylight, brighter than anything you've ever seen with your own 2 eyes, bright enough that you flinch backward from a window you're not even close enough to touch. You can't without meaning to. It's instinct, something buried from a documentary you half-watched years ago. 1, 2, 3. The shockwave doesn't arrive for another 90 seconds. That's how far away the detonation was. That's also how little time that distance actually buys you. 12 miles, roughly, based on the gap between flash and blast. Your brain does the math faster than it has any right to under this kind of panic. Some older, more useful part of your mind taking over from the part that's currently screaming. You have 10 minutes, maybe less if the wind's moving faster than average today, before the fallout cloud drifts directly over your neighborhood. The windows rattle in their frames, not from the blast wave itself, which already rolled past you seconds ago, dulled by distance into something closer to far-off thunder than an explosion. This is aftershock. Somewhere down the block, a car alarm won't stop. Somewhere closer, a dog is barking in a register you've never heard it use before. Your instinct says run. Every nerve in your body is screaming at you to get in the car, get on the road, put distance between yourself and whatever just happened over there. That instinct will kill you. Cars don't outrun fallout. Fallout doesn't chase you down a highway. It falls from directly overhead, drifting on the wind, settling everywhere within a widening radius, and a car is a thin metal shell full of windows. It blocks almost none of the radiation that's about to start raining down on the street. What actually keeps you alive is mass, concrete between you and the sky, earth, distance from every exterior wall and every window in the building. You move. Basement first choice. If you got one, you don't. Not in this apartment, so it's the center of the building instead, the hallway with no windows, as many walls as you can put between yourself and the outside air. You don't grab anything on the way down except water. Whatever's already sealed, already in a bottle or a container with a lid still on it. No time to fill anything new. No time to think about what you're leaving behind. The rule, if you'd ever needed it and never known it existed, shelter for a minimum of 24 hours. Longer, if you can manage it without losing your mind first. Radiation decays fast in that first day. A spot that would kill you in hour 1 can be genuinely survivable by hour 24 and dramatically safer again by day 3. The danger isn't constant. It's a curve, steep at the start and falling fast, and every hour you wait it out is an hour that curve is working in your favor. You sit on a concrete floor in the dark of an interior hallway, knees pulled up, water bottle clutched against your chest like it's something more valuable than water. Somewhere above you, through however many feet of building now stand between your skull and the open sky, fine gray particles are settling on every exposed surface in the neighborhood. Cars, rooftops, the mailbox at the end of your street. The garden your neighbor was so proud of last spring. Hour 2. You hear someone else in the stairwell. A neighbor, breathing hard, having made the same call you did. Not friends exactly. Just 2 people who both figured out the same thing at the same time. You don't say much. There isn't much to say. You just sit a few feet apart in the dark and count the hours by how thirsty you're getting. Hour 6. The silence outside has a different quality than the silence before the flash. Not peaceful, just empty. No sirens now. No car alarms. Whatever emergency response exists is dealing with something closer to the strike itself, and this stretch of city is, for the moment, entirely on its own. Hour 12. You allow yourself the first sip of the second bottle. Rationing water in a dark hallway is its own kind of countdown, layered on top of the radiation clock you're already running. Hour 20. Your legs have gone stiff from sitting on concrete for the better part of a day. Your neighbor has fallen to something between sleep and exhaustion against the far wall. You understand, somewhere around this point, that survival doesn't feel like the movies. It doesn't feel heroic. It feels like being extremely bored and extremely scared at the same time, for far longer than either emotion should reasonably last. Hour 24. You crack the stairwell door an inch. Daylight, thinner than it should be, filtered through whatever's still hanging in the air outside. You don't step out yet. 24 hours was the floor, not the ceiling, but for the first time since the flash, the numbers are finally bending your way instead of against you. For the first time all day, you let yourself believe you might actually get through this one. You don't step outside for another 6 hours after that. 30 hours total, in the end, longer than the minimum, because the neighbor beside you, the one who'd said almost nothing all day, finally speaks up and makes the case for waiting it out a little further than either of you strictly has to. Rather be bored an extra 6 hours than wrong, he says. And you can't argue with the logic even though every muscle in your body is aching to be anywhere but this hallway. You spend those 6 hours doing the small, deliberate things nobody tells you matter until you're actually living through them. You check the water bottles again. 2 left, both still sealed, both rationed now down to careful sips instead of full mouthfuls. You listen, every so often, for any sound from outside that might tell you something useful. Sirens starting back up, voices, anything. Mostly you get silence, and silence, it turns out, is its own kind of information. No panic outside means either everyone else already found shelter, or there's no one left out there to panic. You choose not to think too hard about which. Around hour 28, a low hum starts somewhere above you, a generator maybe, or an emergency vehicle idling nearby. It's the first mechanical sound you've heard since the blast, and it does something to your chest you don't have a word for. Proof that somewhere close by, someone else made it through too, and they're already trying to fix something. By hour 30, the numbers finally tip decisively in your favor. You and the neighbor climb the stairs together. Slower than either of you would like, legs stiff and unsteady after a day and a quarter spent folded onto concrete. He offers you a hand at the top of the stairwell. You take it. Outside, the street is coated in a fine grey film. On the cars, on the sidewalk, dusted along the tops of hedges like a strange dry snow that fell from nowhere. You don't touch anything you don't have to. You keep your sleeves pulled down over your hands out of instinct, more than any specific knowledge, and you start moving, together, toward whatever's left of the rest of your day. You don't feel the second event at all. That's what makes it worse, in a way. The fallout gave you a countdown, a clock you could watch. This one just happens, somewhere above you, sometime during those 24 hours you spend staring at a concrete wall. When you finally come up into daylight, the first thing you notice isn't the sky. It's the silence where sound should be. Your phone, still in your pocket, is dead. Not out of battery dead, but dead in a way you understand immediately isn't going to be solved by any charger you own. The neighbor's car in the lot outside doesn't sputter, doesn't click, doesn't do anything at all when the key turns. Every street light on the block, even the ones that should still have backup power, is dark. An electromagnetic pulse doesn't need to hit anything directly. Detonated high enough in the atmosphere, the current it induces across a wide region does the damage on its own, frying circuit boards, killing anything with delicate electronics all at once, silently across an area that dwarfs whatever the original blast radius was. No power. No traffic lights swinging uselessly overhead. No landlines. No cell towers relaying anything to anyone. No hospitals running on more than whatever fuel is left in a backup generator, and that fuel is already ticking down towards zero on a clock nobody's watching closely enough. Your neighbor tries the car twice more anyway, out of the same stubborn hope you'd have had in his position, before finally accepting what the silence already told you both. This is the part almost nobody prepares for, because on its own, standing in a dead parking lot, it doesn't look like danger. It looks like an inconvenience. A bad day, a service outage, the kind of thing you'd normally complain about and move on from. It takes a few minutes of walking before the actual scale of it lands. The pharmacy on the corner, dark, its refrigerated medication already starting to warm past whatever temperature keeps it usable. The hospital 3 blocks over, running on generator power that buys hours, not days. The water pumping station on the edge of the district, silent, with no electricity, to push water through miles of pipe toward anyone's tap. You're on foot now. Everyone is. The street that would normally be full of moving cars is instead full of people walking in every direction. Some purposeful, most not. All of them recalculating the same basic facts of daily life at the same time. You pass a woman trying to use a payphone that hasn't worked in a decade, out of what looks like pure muscle memory more than any real hope it'll connect. You don't judge her for it. An hour ago you'd have done something equally useless. The people who make it through this stretch aren't the strongest or the fastest. They're the ones who stop wasting time trying to force dead electronics back to life and start moving toward whatever resources never needed power in the first place. Water stored before the blackout, food that doesn't require refrigeration or a stove. People they trust gathered into one place instead of scattered across a city that just went dark all at once. You think about your own apartment. What's actually in it that still works? A hand-crank flashlight you bought as a novelty years ago and never used. Canned food you'd forgotten you owned. A battery radio buried in a closet that, if the EMP's range didn't extend far enough to fry it too, might be the only source of real information left standing. You start walking home with a plan forming that has nothing to do with fixing anything electronic, and everything to do with figuring out what still functions in a world where almost nothing does. 3 streets from home, you see it before you fully understand what you're looking at. A low cloud moving wrong, not blowing loosely with the breeze the way fog or smoke would, crawling, low to the ground, thicker than either has any right to be, catching the last of the afternoon light in a color that doesn't belong outdoors, somewhere between yellow and gray that your brain immediately flags as unnatural. Someone up the block starts running before you do. Someone else, closer to the cloud's edge, starts coughing before it's even reached them, which tells you everything you need to know about how much faster panic spreads through a street than gas does. You don't have 10 minutes this time. You're not sure you have 3. The nearest structure, with 4 solid walls and a door that closes, isn't your apartment. It's a small shop halfway down the block, metal shutter half drawn, owner already backing inside it with wide eyes and a hand waving you toward the gap. Not the safest place in the city. Just the closest place you can seal in the next 90 seconds. Inside, shutter down behind you, and then the part almost nobody thinks to do fast enough, the part that separates the people who make it from the people who don't, sealing every gap immediately without pausing to catch your breath first. Door frame, window edges, even the ones that look already closed. Vents, if you can reach them. You feel it before you fully see it. A chemical sting at the back of your throat that means the seal isn't perfect yet. Somewhere air is still finding its way in. You grab a folded top from a shelf and press it hard against the gap under the shutter, and the shop owner does the same on the other side, without either of you needing to discuss the plan out loud. Most chemical agents are heavier than air. They pool low, they creep through gaps you'd never notice on an ordinary day, under doors, through outlet covers, along the thin channel where a floor meets a wall. You move to the highest point of the room you can find, the top of a supply shelf, awkward and undignified, but height is the entire strategy right now, not what your body wants. Every instinct says, crouch low, curl up, make yourself small, the way you would hiding from anything else dangerous. But the gas is below you if you're above it, and right now every inch of elevation is worth more than comfort or dignity. Minutes pass in a way that stretches longer than minutes should. The sting in your throat doesn't get worse. It doesn't get meaningfully better either. You just wait and breathe as shallow and careful as your lungs will allow, watching the thin line of yellow-tinned light under the shutter. For any sign it's fading, the shop owner, crouched a few feet away, mutters something dry under his breath about how this was supposed to be his slow Tuesday. The kind of joke that only makes sense in a room where the alternative to laughing is falling apart entirely. You laugh despite yourself, quiet and a little too sharp, and it helps more than it should. 20 minutes in, the sting in your throat flares suddenly worse, and for a stretch of maybe 90 seconds, you're convinced the seal has failed somewhere you haven't checked. You scan the room from your perch on the shelf, tracing every edge, every joint, every place two surfaces meet that might have a gap you missed in the first frantic seconds. The shop owner spots it before you do. A ventilation grate near the ceiling, painted over so many times it blended into the wall, air moving through it in a thin, visible shimmer that neither of you noticed until the light caught it right. He climbs half the shelving unit to reach it, wedging a folded rag into the grate with hands that are shaking more than his voice, let on a moment ago. The shimmer stops. The sting in your throat, slowly, over the next several minutes, stops climbing. Your eyes are watering now, whether from the chemical trace still lingering in the room's air or simple exhausted panic, you genuinely can't tell anymore. The shop owner passes you a bottle of water from a case near the register. His own emergency stock, apparently, kept for reasons that had nothing to do with a day like this one. And you rinse your mouth out and spit into an empty box, rather than swallow anything that might carry trace contamination. 30 minutes in, you start talking, quietly, about nothing much. His shop, how long he's owned it, whether he thinks any of it will still be standing by next week. Not because either of you particularly wants small talk, because the alternative is sitting in silence, listening for your own breathing to change for the worse, and neither of you can stomach that for a full hour straight. Nearly 40 minutes pass before the light under the shutter shifts, brightening back towards something like normal daylight. You wait another 10 past that just to be sure, before either of you moves toward the door. When you finally step back out onto the street, the air tastes like ordinary air again, which after 40 minutes of doubting you'd ever get to say that, feels like its own small miracle. You didn't know it yet, crouched on that shelf with a stranger and a length of top between you, but something else had already found its way into you. Exposure. Not chemical this time, biological. Something that moves person to person, and by the time symptoms show up, there's no reliable way to know exactly when or where you picked it up. Could have been the crowd fleeing the gas cloud. Could have been the shop owner himself, though neither of you will ever know for certain, and it doesn't much matter now. The city's response comes faster than anything you've seen from any level of government in your entire life. A quarantine perimeter, drawn in a white arc around the outbreak zone, closing in 30 minutes according to the announcement, crackling out of a passing patrol vehicle's loudspeaker. You're on the wrong side of that line, and the arc is tightening from both directions at once. The choice in front of you is the kind nobody wants to make out loud, let alone decide inside of 30 minutes. Get inside the perimeter before it seals, into crowded shelter, alongside hundreds of other exposed and possibly infected people, with everything that implies about your own risk going up, not down. Or stay outside it. Cut off entirely from the medical supply, food distribution and organized structure the quarantine zone is being built specifically to protect. There's no clean answer here. Nobody tells you that part in advance, that some of the hardest choices in a war like this one aren't about danger versus safety. They're about choosing which specific danger you'd rather face. You choose the perimeter, not because it feels safe, because outside it, in 30 minutes, there will be no structure at all, no supply line, no medical response, nothing but whatever you can scrounge on your own in a city already stretched past its limits by everything that's happened today. Inside, it's controlled chaos in a very literal sense. Checkpoints staffed by people in protective gear, temperature screening at every entry point, a holding area already dividing people into groups based on how sick they visibly look. A soldier at the gate, young, clearly exhausted, doing his best to sound calm while directing a line of frightened people with practiced, repetitive instructions. Waves you through, toward the group that looks the least symptomatic. You keep distance where the crowd allows it. You keep your hands away from your face, less out of active thought now and more because the last few hours have rewired the habit into you permanently. Survival here isn't really about avoiding exposure anymore. For you, that possibility ended back in that sealed shop, one way or another. It's about staying inside a system that has medicine, clean water, and people specifically trained to notice when someone's condition is turning before it becomes an emergency. Nobody can walk back. You find a strip of open wall to sit against, knees pulled up again, in a pose that's becoming uncomfortably familiar after today. An elderly woman a few feet away offers you half a ration bar without being asked. The kind of small, unprompted kindness that means more today than it would have a week ago. You take it. You say, "Thank you." You mean it more than the words usually carry. An hour in, a medical volunteer moves through the holding area with a clipboard, asking the same short list of questions to everyone in turn: symptoms, exposure timeline, anything unusual. When she reaches you, you answer as honestly as you can, though half the timeline is guesswork by this point, hours blurred together since the flash on the horizon this morning. She marks something on the clipboard, tells you to flag anyone nearby if your temperature spikes, and moves on to the next person before you can ask any of the questions crowding your own head. Somewhere behind you, a child starts crying, not from fear exactly, more the flat exhaustion of a very long day finally catching up all at once. A parent nearby tries to soothe him with a voice pitched low and steady, the kind of forced calm every adult in this holding area seems to have found from somewhere over the last few hours, whether they actually feel it or not. 2 hours in, the checkpoint soldier from the gate walks the length of the holding area, handing out thin foiled blankets from a crate, one per person. No explanation needed. You take yours and drape it over your shoulders more, for the psychological weight of it than any real cold. Evenings haven't turned chilly yet, but the blanket feels like something. Some small proof that a system is still functioning even in the middle of all this. The elderly woman beside you introduces herself properly now, somewhere in that second hour, in the low, unhurried way people do when they've decided they might be spending a while in each other's company. You don't exchange much beyond that. It's enough for now to know there's a name attached to the kindness. And then you wait, the same way you've waited through everything else today, to find out which version of the next few days you're actually going to get. 2 days into quarantine, word moves through the holding area before any official announcement catches up to it. The water treatment plant just went offline. Not from a bomb this time, and not from the pulse that killed the power grid days ago. A cyberattack, a completely separate front in the same war, aimed squarely at whatever backup systems had still been limping essential infrastructure along. No power was never really the crisis on its own. Water was always the actual clock running underneath everything else. 48 hours. That's the rough estimate passed hand to hand through the crowd before whatever's currently stored runs dry. And everything still coming out of a tap after that point is untreated, unfiltered, and not something you want anywhere near your mouth. The quarantine zone has stores of bottled water, rationed carefully by the people running distribution. But 48 hours against an unknown and growing number of people crammed into one perimeter is not a comfortable equation. And you're clearly not the only person doing that math in your head. You start doing what everyone around you starts doing at almost the same moment, filling anything that can hold liquid, while there's still liquid worth holding. Someone hands you an empty bottle without a word. You refill it from a tap that hasn't gone bad yet. The contamination presumably still working its way through the pipes toward this particular block. Somewhere in the crowd, a man who says he used to work in municipal utilities explains it plainly, the way people do when panic needs a plan more than it needs comfort. Boiling kills most of what makes water dangerous, if you've got any reliable way left to generate heat. Filtration through cloth or a coffee filter removes visible sediment. It does not remove pathogens. It buys you clearer looking water, not necessarily safer water, and the difference matters more than it sounds like it should. You spend the better part of an afternoon helping rig a crude boiling station out of a metal drum and whatever dry wood people can scrounge from broken pallets nearby. Not because anyone assigned you the job, but because idle hands in a quarantine zone start to feel dangerous in their own way, and this at least feels like doing something. By evening, a line has formed at the drum. Cups and bottles held out one at a time, and there's something almost normal about it. People waiting their turn, a little small talk, someone joking dryly that this is the closest thing to a coffee shop line this city's had in days. Small normal things, rebuilt out of necessity, in the middle of everything else. The grid staying dark was survivable. Days without power you could manage, and mostly did. Days without water is a different kind of countdown entirely, and everyone in this perimeter knows it now, whether they'd have admitted it out loud yesterday or not. The radio crackles to life on a hand-crank unit. Someone's been guarding jealously since the blackout, and the voice on it says the words that turned the entire quarantine zone into a stampede of quiet, controlled panic. Military confirmation relayed to channels that took hours to reach anyone this far from the source. This city, your city, is now a confirmed target. Not a maybe, not a drill, not a rumor passed hand to hand and inflated along the way. A confirmed target with an unknown and possibly short window before the warning stops being a warning and starts being the thing itself. You have maybe an hour, maybe considerably less, given how long the confirmation itself took just to reach this crowd. The highways are the obvious answer, and instantly the worst one. You can already picture, with sick clarity, exactly what an hour does to a city's worth of people trying to funnel through the same 6 lanes at the same time. Gridlock isn't a risk in that scenario, it's a mathematical certainty. And gridlock on an exposed highway at the moment the thing you're evacuating from actually arrives is its own separate kind of trap, layered on top of the first one. You move on foot, and you move now, before the roads clot solid behind whatever's left of the crowd. Every minute of hesitation adds a minute to however long you'll be exposed in the open, once the window actually closes. The main street behind you is already thickening with vehicles that aren't moving, horns overlapping into a single flat wall of sound that somehow makes the panic feel more organized and less all at once. You don't look back at it for longer than a second. The elderly woman from the quarantine line, the one who split her ration bar with you 2 days ago, falls into step beside you without either of you discussing it. Neither of you says it out loud, but you both decided wordlessly that you're better odds together than apart. Out past the immediate blocks, away from the clotted main arteries, along side streets and alley cuts that nobody else thought of first, because nobody else stopped moving long enough to think. That's where the hour actually starts buying you something real. You don't know exactly where safe is. Nobody fully does, in the middle of something like this. You just know that distance gained early is worth dramatically more than distance gained late, and right now every early minute is the only currency either of you has left to spend. The woman's pace is slower than yours. You slow to match it without needing to decide to. Somewhere in the last few days the math of who you're willing to leave behind changed, without you consciously choosing when. Whatever ground the two of you gained on foot, it isn't enough distance to avoid what's unfolding back toward the center of the city as afternoon slides toward evening. Food distribution collapsed sometime in the last few hours. You don't know exactly when, only that the street ahead of you, 3 blocks from the district you're trying to reach, has turned from tents to something closer to a riot. This isn't the gas cloud. This isn't fallout you can shelter through with patience and a concrete wall. This is people, in large numbers, under enormous strain, and that makes it its own distinct category of dangerous. Martial law rolled in fast behind the collapse of distribution, checkpoints appearing at intersections that had none an hour ago, a curfew with a hard deadline broadcast on a loop from a passing vehicle, and a street between you and the other side of it that's currently somewhere between a crowd and a full crush. You pull the older woman back against a store front wall as a surge of people moves past too fast, too many bodies packed into too little space, and you wait for a gap instead of forcing one open. Crossing 3 blocks of that isn't about speed, not primarily. It's about reading it, staying to the edges where the crowd thins, away from the center, where density turns a crowd into a crush, moving with whatever flow exists instead of directly against it, even when that flow isn't heading exactly where the two of you need to go. The curfew deadline isn't a suggestion, and it isn't flexible for people who almost made it. Once it locks the city down, whatever side of a given checkpoint you're standing on becomes the side you're stuck on, not out of cruelty, but because that's simply how a checkpoint operates under emergency law, and nobody enforcing it has the authority to make exceptions, even if they wanted to. You time it wrong once, pulling back from a surge a half second too early, and losing 30 precious seconds standing still. You time it right the second time, catching a gap right behind the crowd's leading edge and moving through it fast, the woman's hand gripping your sleeve the entire way. Halfway across the second block, a man near the front of the surge stumbles and goes down, and for a half second the crowd around him doesn't slow at all. The sheer momentum of that many frightened people moving in one direction doesn't stop for one person on the ground, no matter how much you'd like to believe it would. You break from the edge you'd been hugging just long enough to grab his arm and haul him back up before the gap behind you closes, and the 3 of you press forward together now instead of 2. "Ugh, didn't sign up for this," the man mutters, breathless, and you almost laugh at how understated it sounds against everything that's happened over the last week. Nobody signed up for any of it. That's rather the point. A checkpoint 2 blocks short of your original destination has already gone from orderly to strained, a young soldier at the barrier trying to process people faster than the line is growing, another soldier beside him with a hand raised, calling out that the checkpoint capacity is close to its limit and late arrivals may be redirected. You hear the words redirected and feel your stomach drop in a way that has nothing to do with the running you've already done tonight. You don't wait to find out what redirected means in practice. You cut left down a side street you'd normally never take at night, betting that a longer route with no crowd beats a shorter one with an uncertain outcome at the end of it. The elderly woman's breath is ragged beside you, but she doesn't slow, and neither does the man you pulled off the ground, who's apparently decided the three of you are traveling together now, without anyone formally agreeing to it. The side street empties out onto a smaller checkpoint, thinner crowd, a soldier who looks just as exhausted as the one at the main barrier, but with noticeably more patience left in him. He waves your group through without much ceremony, checking faces more than papers, the kind of triage that happens when a system built for calm conditions gets stress-tested by conditions that are anything but. By the time the three of you reach the checkpoint on the far side, the curfew siren is already beginning its slow wind-up somewhere behind you, echoing oddly between buildings in a way that makes it sound closer than it probably is. You make it through with minutes to spare. Not because any of you was the fastest person on that street tonight, but because you were among the most patient in a situation that was actively punishing everyone who wasn't, and because, somewhere in the last few blocks, three strangers had quietly decided that better odds were worth slowing down for. You made it through the blast, days ago now. You made it through the fallout window, the blackout, the gas, the quarantine, the water crisis, the evacuation, the riot. The bomb itself didn't get you. What comes next might if you're not careful about it, because exposure doesn't announce itself all at once, in one dramatic moment you'd notice. It compounds, quietly, in the background of everything else you've been surviving. Every hour spent in a contaminated zone during those first days, every unwashed mouthful of food, every breath taken in a space that never got properly sealed, adds up toward a total dose that ultimately decides how the next stretch of your life actually goes. This is the part almost nobly survives dramatically, because it isn't a single 10-minute countdown you can white-knuckle your way through. It's days, quiet, unglamorous, exhausting days, where the real ongoing fight is finding food and water that hasn't been sitting exposed to fallout since the morning this all started. Fatigue sets in first, the kind that has nothing to do with how much sleep you've gotten. A dull, bone-deep tiredness that no amount of rest seems to touch. Nausea comes and goes, depending on total exposure, on factors you have no way of measuring yourself. Your body quietly keeping score of everything you couldn't see happening to it along the way, day after day, without ever telling you the running total. Sealed containers become the only food you fully trust. Anything that was underground, indoors, or covered during the fallout window itself. Produce that grew or was harvested after the event, exposed to open air and whatever settled out of that cloud, is the thing to actively avoid. Not because it looks any different on the outside, but precisely because it doesn't, and the danger is invisible by design. You eat carefully, deliberately, the way you've never had to think about eating before in your entire life. You drink only from sources you know for certain were sealed before the blast. You stay indoors more than you want to, longer than feels strictly necessary some days, because the real damage here doesn't come from one dramatic moment you can point to later. It comes from every small, boring exposure you didn't bother to avoid, because in the moment it didn't feel urgent enough to matter. The elderly woman beside you, this many days in, has started coughing in a way that worries you more than you say out loud to her. You share your sealed rations without either of you commenting on why. Some deaths don't need to be spoken about to be understood. Radiation sickness doesn't care that you already survived the parts of this war that felt like the real danger. It's been counting the entire time, in the background, whether you were paying attention to it or not, and the only real defense against it was never heroism. It was just careful, boring, consistent caution, repeated for days on end, long after the adrenaline of the earlier crises had already worn off. Word reaches what's left of your district days after the blockade actually started, the way news always seems to arrive late once the systems built to carry it fast are the exact systems that just collapsed. Every incoming shipment to the coast gone, not delayed, cut entirely by a naval blockade sitting somewhere just past the horizon that supplied this entire region with more than anyone here ever wanted to admit out loud. No confirmed timeline for when or if it lifts. Weeks. That's the estimate whispered through whatever remains of the local supply chain. Weeks of food on hand, citywide, at current rationing, with no guarantee the number holds, if this drags on longer than that projection assumes. This isn't a 10-minute problem anymore, or even a 48-hour one. This is the slow kind of crisis, the kind that doesn't test how fast you can move, it tests how well an entire community can stretch what it already has, and whether that community turns against itself under pressure or starts sharing on purpose instead. Somewhere down the block from the shelter you and the older woman have settled into, someone has already turned a strip of unused yard into rough rows of vegetables that won't be ready for weeks, planted with the exact dry humor of a person who knows precisely how absurd it is to be gardening in the middle of a war, and does it anyway, because doing something beats doing nothing. You start rationing without anyone officially telling you to, not because a printed chart hands you the math, because you've watched enough of this war unfold over the last week and a half to know with total certainty now that waiting until the supply visibly runs out is always too late to start being careful about it. The blockade doesn't kill anyone directly, not the way a blast or a gas cloud does. It doesn't need to, it just quietly removes the option of not thinking about tomorrow for as long as it holds, and you find yourself, for the first time since the flash over the horizon, planning in terms of weeks instead of minutes. The elderly woman teaches you, one long afternoon, how to make a single bag of rice stretch across 4 meals instead of 2. It's not a skill you ever expected to need. It's one you're grateful now to have. Day 4 of the blockade. A rumor moves through the shelter that a supply convoy might be attempting to run the blockade line under cover of night, and for a few hours the whole district hums with a cautious, unspoken hope nobody wants to say out loud in case saying it jinxes it. By morning, the rumor's either false or the attempt failed. Nobody's entirely sure which, and nobody presses too hard for details that might turn out worse than the not knowing. Rationing gets harder before it gets easier, somewhere around the second week, in ways that have nothing to do with actual hunger and everything to do with the psychological weight of small portions repeated meal after meal after meal. You catch yourself staring too long at an empty plate more than once, not because you're still hungry exactly, but because some old stubborn part of your brain hasn't caught up to the new math yet. The garden down the block, the one someone planted half as a joke in the first days of the blockade, starts producing something recognizable by the third week. Thin, early vegetables, nowhere near enough to matter on their own, but enough to remind the block that time, however slowly, is still moving forward, and that effort put in early eventually pays out, even in the middle of something like this. You spend an evening helping thin the rows alongside a handful of neighbors you'd never spoken to before the blockade started, and there's something almost peaceful about it. Hands in soil, low conversation, the specific kind of quiet that comes from people doing useful work together, instead of simply waiting for news that isn't coming. Weeks pass this way, not dramatic, not the kind of survival that makes for an exciting story on its own, just careful, patient, unglamorous endurance, day after day, until one morning the estimate on the blockade shifts for the first time since it started. Not lifted, not yet, but shortened. And after this many weeks, a shortened estimate feels almost as good as news gets. The blockade is still holding, weeks in, when a new and more immediate threat arrives close enough that staying above ground stops being an option at all. You're not alone this time, and neither is the woman who stayed at your side since the evacuation. 40 strangers, give or take a handful, sealed into a shelter built for a fraction of that number. Air filtration straining under a load it was never designed or rated to carry. Hours. That's the rough estimate on the filtration system before it fails completely, and 40 people breathing in a sealed space with failing air isn't a slow crisis anymore. It's the fastest, sharpest clock you've faced since the fallout window on the very first day of all this. Shh. Someone near the door raises their voice about opening it. Just for a minute. Just for some real air from outside. And the room quiets him fast, collectively, because everyone down here already understands, without needing it spelled out, that whatever's waiting outside right now is worse than what's slowly running low in here. The filtration problem has a fix. If enough hands understand mechanical systems well enough to find it under pressure, in bad lighting, with 40 frightened people watching and silently hoping. It isn't glamorous work. It's checking CUs one at a time, checking intakes, checking every plausible point of failure methodically, patiently, instead of panicking through the process and missing something obvious in the rush. You've made it through 9 of these threats already. Fallout, blackout, gas, quarantine, thirst, a highway you didn't take, a curfew you beat by minutes, a sickness that never announced itself dramatically, a blockade that tested patience instead of speed. You know by this point, with total clarity, exactly what panic costs in a situation like this, and exactly what patience buys instead. So you do here what's kept you alive through every single threat before this one. You stay useful. You hold a light steady for someone else's hands instead of demanding to be the one fixing it yourself. You stay calm on purpose, deliberately, even in the moments you don't feel it even slightly. And you trust, completely, that the people crowded into this shelter around you, total strangers to each other an hour ago, something much closer to a unit now, want the exact same ending you do. The elderly woman beside you squeezes your hand once, without a word. Somewhere around the point, the air starts to feel noticeably thinner. You squeeze back. An hour in, the estimate on the filtration system gets revised downward. Not hours anymore, but something closer to 90 minutes. And the number moves through the shelter in a whisper that somehow travels faster than any announcement could. You watch the mood in the room shift with it. Not panic, not yet. Something quieter and more dangerous than panic. The particular kind of stillness that settles over a group of people when everyone's doing the same math at the same time and getting the same bad answer. The man from the crowd 2 nights ago, the one you pulled off the ground before the checkpoint, who somehow ended up in this shelter too. One more small proof that this city is smaller than it feels. Volunteers to help with the filtration unit alongside 2 others who claim some mechanical background. You end up holding a light steady for them instead, angled into a gap behind a panel that's clearly not been opened in years, dust and grime making the actual mechanism almost impossible to see clearly. 45 minutes in, someone starts coughing 2 rows over, and the room's attention snaps toward the sound before anyone consciously decides to look. It's nothing, or nothing yet, just dry air and nerves, but you feel how close to the surface everyone's fear actually is, and how little it would take for that stillness to tip into something worse. The elderly woman starts talking, quietly, to the people near her, not about the air, not about the filtration system, but about nothing in particular, where she used to live. A garden she kept for 30 years before any of this started. It shouldn't help. Somehow it does, spreading outward in a ripple of forced, deliberate calm that the room badly needs and that no announcement or instruction could have manufactured on command. 30 minutes in, the 2 with mechanical background have traced the problem to an intake line, and the panel work turns from searching to actually fixing, hands moving with more purpose now, less randomly, the light you're holding finally pointed at something that matters. 15 minutes left on the revised estimate when a voice calls out that they've found it. A valve, stuck half soot, easily missed, now forced back open by hands that didn't stop checking even when it started to feel hopeless. The change isn't dramatic, no triumphant rush of fresh air, no cinematic moment. Just a slow, gradual easing, minute by minute, the tightness in your chest loosening by degrees rather than all at once, until somewhere in the second hour after the fix, you realize you stopped consciously counting your own breaths for the first time since the estimate first dropped. The air holds, barely, long enough. 10 ways this war tried to end you. Nuclear fallout in the 10 minutes after a flash on the horizon. An EMP blackout that killed every electronic device in the region without a single warning. Gas in the street, thick and low and moving wrong. A quarantine line closing in 30 minutes with no clean choice on either side of it. A grid gone dark from the inside, and a water crisis that turned out to be the real countdown all along. A highway you didn't take because you understood in time exactly what an hour does to gridlock. A curfew you beat by minutes through patience instead of speed. A radiation sickness that never announced itself all at once and demanded quiet discipline instead of heroics. A blockade that tested how well a whole community could stretch what little it had left. and 40 strangers sealed underground, sharing air that very nearly ran out before it didn't. You made it through all 10, not because you were the strongest person in any of those rooms, on any of those streets, in any of those crowds, but because you learned, thread by thread, day by day, that panic is the thing that actually gets people killed far more often than the danger itself ever does. The war isn't over. It rarely ends the way anyone standing in the middle of it expects it to. But you're still here. The woman beside you is still here. 40 strangers who became something closer to neighbors are still here. And now you know, in your body and not just your head, exactly what that takes. If you made it this far, you already know what to do next. Subscribe, because the next 10 ways this war finds to test you are already waiting, and you're going to want to know what they teach you too.